Crisis at the border. Tensions building as the residents of Tijuana, Mexico protest the caravan camped out in their city. The mayor describing their arrival as an avalanche. President Trump tweeting this. The mayor of Tijuana, Mexico just stated that, quote, the city is ill prepared to handle this many migrants. The backlog could last 6 months. Likewise, the U.S. is ill prepared for this invasion and will not stand for it. They are accusing crime and big problems in Mexico. Go home.
William Lajeunesse back in his post. He's live across the southern border now with more. William, how is it? Good morning.
Good morning, Bill. Up until just 7 minutes ago, this was empty. This is something you never see. The U.S. shut down the border. We're sending a message. Now, let me show you how that's working. Now, the Mexicans have brought in these barriers, right? Basically cutting down the amount of traffic. And I'm going to take you over here. They've got more barriers that they can bring in very quickly, all in anticipation that the migrants are going to make a run on the border, right? So they want to be able to stop that from happening. So back here, there are 28 lanes of traffic, right? So this is 90,000 cars a day come through here. This is the lifeblood of any border economy, especially Tijuana. This is money. This is one way of sending a message against Tijuana to turn them against the migrants. I'm going to show you some video from yesterday, which is already really happening. Basically, this was the scene. Basically, Mexicans, about 1,000 locals saying, go home. Residents, they threw water bottles, beer cans at riot police. 1,000 locals chanting, Viva Mexico, Hondurans go home, we do not want you here. Immigrants, yes, invaders, no. Police were able to stop them just short of the migrant shelter, which was on lockdown for their own safety.
Of course, I agree with that 100%. It should have. Yeah, I mean, they just, for whatever reason, I don't know why they didn't stop it. I mean, they got the manpower to do it.
We are here for work, to have a better life, and no trouble, not troublemakers. I think that we are here only for better future, I think.
So yes, there was an anti-immigrant rally in Mexico. They say in the caravan, they entered illegally, they violated, they came in here basically in a violent manner across the Guatemalan border, that they lack documents, they fear that some may have criminal records, and they're saying to their own government, hey, we have 40% of our people living in poverty, why did you invite them here?
We don't dislike a certain group of people because they're from one country or another. We are here because our government has not taken control of these, what we call invasions, basically breaking down the barriers and throwing rocks at the police.
There's only a small group of people that show acts of violence in the border. So I think it's important not to generalize to a whole country or whole countries, only for that people that didn't act well.
So Mexico has a mess on its hands, right? That shelter is becoming a refugee camp. It's a symbol, really, of the problems and the controversy that this has all created. Some may regret coming here, and Mexico may regret letting them in. But Bill, just to show you, so these are K-rails, right? And so what the United States is doing is they're slowly shutting down more and more lanes. So again, if there's a run on the border, they can very quickly shut it down. For the migrants today, there'll be a job fair saying that there's 20,000 jobs around the country to try to get them out of Tijuana. Back to you.
William Lajeunesse, thank you, sir. Tijuana, Mexico. Thank you.
All right. Now, meanwhile, the election madness in Florida, it is finally over, folks. After all the recounting by hand, the votes have been tallied.
Ron DeSantis, officially the next governor of Florida. Rick Scott is the next senator, which brings us today to our newsroom newsfeed.
Why are Florida elections so often a mess?
I don't know.
Election drama in Florida. Who would have thought?
It is all now finally over. One of the closest elections in Florida history. Republican Ron DeSantis will be the state's next governor.
The only thing better than being elected governor of Florida is being elected twice in 2 weeks. Moving on now.
RJ and I wanted to take a moment to congratulate Mr. DeSantis.
The Senate race between Rick Scott and Bill Nelson
is finally over after a recount and with a concession.
After 18 years in office, Bill Nelson in the Senate is conceding to Rick Scott.
Things worked out a little differently. I was not victorious in this race.
Governor Rick Scott will soon become Senator Rick Scott.
I'm excited about the win. It's going to be exciting to go to Washington.
It marks the first time in a century that Florida will be represented by 2 Republican senators at the same time.
I can't stop the feeling of relief, guys, that the madness in South Florida has officially ended.
Well, our next guest is Rick Scott's longest serving and most senior advisor. He designed the recount strategy. His name's Kurt Anderson, founding partner of On Message and today's headliner. Sir, good morning to you, and thank you for being here with us today.
Hey, thank you for having me.
At what point were you most concerned?
Well, you know, I would say I don't think we were ever concerned that we were going to lose the recount because the votes were there. I would say the most concerning part was when in both Broward and Palm Beach, they kept changing the tallies and wouldn't tell anybody why they were doing it. And finally, we had to go to court to get them to enforce the law. That was probably the most unnerving part of it.
But a lot of that was early on. But you declared victory early on. And part of the strategy sometimes is to force your opponent to catch you, to play catch-up.
Well, we never... That's right. But the fact is there's never been an election in American politics with this big a margin that was overturned. So there wasn't a question about that. And the truth is what the Democrats did was Bill Nelson basically shut his campaign down and went into hiding, and they turned the whole thing over to their lawyers that came down from D.C., and they put at least 9 federal lawsuits in trying to change Florida law after the election. So it was kind of an absurd strategy. But, you know, fortunately, we prevailed.
What was absurd was the deadlines that were missed, particularly in Broward County by 2 minutes. Brenda Snipes apparently is resigning over this whole thing. What a mess. They said they didn't know how to use the computer. I mean, you're responsible for hand counting hundreds of thousands of votes, but you don't know how to use the voting computer?
Well, they had used that computer 5 days earlier to submit the initial results in on time, and then mysteriously they didn't know how to afterwards. Now, you know, with regard to Brenda Snipes resigning, this is a dark day for the Democrats. I mean, the DNC should lower their flag to half staff, because this is a blow to their chances of winning Florida in the presidential race in 2 years.
Oh, you believe that, huh?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you can decide if you think it's more incompetence or corruption or whatever, but it's mayhem, and it's just so terribly run that this was sort of part of the Democrat strategy, was just confusion and in Broward, and there's still 2,000 ballots that they admit are floating around somewhere.
There was a lot of politics, red tape, and BS, if you don't mind my French here, that Republicans had to cut through. And they had a secret weapon in the Florida recount. Her name was Jessica First Johnson. She's a 37-year-old general counsel to the National Republican Senatorial Committee. And she had to go down there and try to cut through all this mess. How essential was she to this recount process?
Jessica was crucial to the recount. We had a lot of firms engaged, firms that were veterans of Bush v. Gore. We had Jason Torchinsky, our campaign lawyer, who was great. But Jessica came down there and brought a lot of order to the madness, and she was indispensable. The one thing that I would tell you about this recount and about this election that people don't understand, this election and this recount was Rick Scott versus Chuck Schumer and the National Democrat Party. That's really what it was. Bill Nelson was only tangentially involved in this. This was all about 2020. Schumer and his group spent more than $50 million, the most they've ever spent trying to beat a Republican running for the U.S. Senate. And that's really who the participants in this election were.
Interesting. Here's the tweet from the president. On screen, he says, from day one, Rick Scott never wavered. He was a great governor and will be an even greater senator and representing the people of Florida. Congratulations to Rick on having waged such a courageous and successful campaign. I think your analysis there about 2020 is very interesting. Do you think that Broward ballot, the way it was constructed, cost Bill Nelson votes?
No, I don't. And in 06, there was about the same difference between the number of votes in the governor's race and the Senate race. That's just one of a whole bunch of red herrings that Mark Elias and the Democrats threw out there. And they have endless, every time you beat down one of their crazy theories, they come up with another one. And the truth about them is, they say, Bill Nelson and Mark Elias say they want every vote counted, and they do. They want the legal votes counted and the illegal votes. They want the votes that came in after the deadline, the ones that are from non-citizens, the ones that don't have signatures on them. That's their definition of having every vote counted.
Kurt, you've been with the governor, now turned senator, since the very beginning in 2000. Now that this election is over, how is this going to help Floridians move forward?
Well, you know, the governor, the thing that people in Florida appreciate about the governor, and the reason he was able to win 4 races that everyone said he couldn't win, is he has this weird thing he does that doesn't happen in politics, and that is when he says he's going to do something, he does it. It's just really odd. And he really looks at things, you know, exterior to politics. And I'll give you one example. When he came in as governor, they would say, hey, oh, sir, you got to sign this and do this. And he'd say, why? And if the answer was, we're not sure why, we just have always done it that way, he's like, well, I'm not doing it. You know, come back. So he really believes that government needs to be reinvented.
Now,
and that's kind of the approach he'll bring.
It's an interesting answer. And you know how Washington, D.C. can swallow politicians. But given Rick Scott's track record, you think about Mitt Romney coming into the Senate from Utah as well. What's the impact of these two men on that body, do you think, if there is one?
Yeah, you know, everybody in Washington, when you say, oh, there's a reformer coming up, they yawn and go back to their next cocktail party. And I understand that. But I would just tell you, Rick Scott means what he says. He brings a mind. He doesn't need the job. I think that's what's part of it, is he's had a tremendous amount of success in business. And his view is government does not need to be incompetent. The whole thing about, oh, it's good enough for government work, he just doesn't accept it. So he's got a lot of ideas on how to reform the system. He will push them hard. He's an easy to get along with person, a unique politician in that he's not the politician who comes in slapping backs and telling stories. He comes in listening. His view is that he's never learned anything while he was talking. So he's a very cerebral guy and somebody to really be taken seriously.
Well, we thank you for your time. Kurt Anderson, congratulations on the victory.
Kurt, thank you.
Thank you.
Yes and yes. I think the appointment is unconstitutional. He's clearly a principal officer, and the fact that he is a temporary principal officer doesn't mean that that is any less subject to Senate confirmation. Constitutionally, it has to be subject to confirmation. I think they lose that case when it goes to the Supreme Court.
That's California Congressman Adam Schiff, who is likely to be the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee when the Democrats take control in January. Many in the party vowing to go after acting Attorney General Matt Whitaker if he doesn't recuse himself from oversight of the Mueller investigation. Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge is live in Washington with more. Hi, Catherine.
Well, hi, Julian. Good morning. The administration is standing by the acting attorney general and the Office of Legal Counsel opinion. The appointment is lawful and constitutional. On Fox, the president said he was not aware of Matt Whitaker's negative statements about the special counsel investigation before he made the appointment, adding that Whitaker is independent and the president will not intervene.
Whitaker decides in any way to limit or curtail the Mueller investigation. Are you okay with that?
Look, it's going to be up to him. I think he's very well aware politically. I think he's astute politically. He's a very smart person, a very respected person. He's going to do what's right. I really believe he's going to do what's right.
As for written answers for the special counsel, Fox News is told that they will not be submitted by the president's legal team today, Julie.
And this isn't sitting well with Democrats.
Well, that's right. On the Sunday shows, Congressman Elijah Cummings, who's expected to become the chairman of the House Government Oversight Committee, insisted that it's not a legitimate appointment, despite the Office of Legal Counsel's opinion that reads in part, the constitutionality of Mr. Whitaker's designation is supported by Supreme Court precedent, by acts of Congress, and by countless examples of executive practice.
With him being in there, I don't think so. I don't know that we have that power. I would love to see him recuse himself because I think the things that he has said about defunding the special probe and the many things that he has talked about with regard to his opinion, a negative opinion with regard to special counsel in the process, I don't think that he's the proper person to be in that position.
And for some context, just before the holiday break, Republican leadership in the Senate refused an expedited vote on legislation protecting the special counsel on the basis that it's not necessary, given that the president has stated publicly he has no intention of intervening. Julie.
All right, Catherine Herridge, thank you.
Some breaking news now on the murder of the columnist Jamal Khashoggi. The president says the official U.S. report is expected out tomorrow. Was the Crown Prince directly involved in that brutal execution, and how will that shape our relations with the kingdom? We are live with the latest on that story coming up in a moment here.
Plus, it is hell on earth in California right now. 80 people now dead, 1,000 others still accounted for, and now rain bringing, believe it or not, even more catastrophe. We'll go live to the Golden State next.
Nobody would have ever thought this could have happened. So the federal government is behind you. We're all behind each other.
The president not only has signed a presidential declaration giving California substantial funding, but he said and pledged very specifically to continue to help us. So I think we're on a good path, but it's still going to be difficult, because the only way to assure the long-term forest health is not just, cutting trees. It's going to require reducing carbon emissions.
And that's California Governor there, Jerry Brown, on the devastating wildfires raging on both ends of the state. At least 80 people now dead and more than 1,000 others still accounted for. Firefighters there continue to struggle to gain the upper hand with rain in the forecast that could actually bring new challenges. KTXL's Pedro Rivera is live in Chico, California with the very latest. Hi, Pedro.
Good morning. The latest numbers coming in from CAL FIRE. The campfire burning here in Northern California, 66%. So hopefully those numbers can continue to go up. But like you mentioned, with rain coming in, they're hoping that could bring some moisture to the ground, which would be a good thing. But there are some difficulties. It could trigger some debris flows. A lot of where the fire is already in some places that are really steep and tough, rugged terrain to get to. So if that moisture does come, you get some debris flow. That could be a major problem for CAL FIRE crews. And since the fire started more than a week ago, it's left thousands and thousands of people displaced all throughout Northern California, many of them staying right here in this parking lot behind me. This is the Walmart parking lot in Chico. You see just a number of tents set up here, many people sleeping in their cars. This camp is actually being shut down because city officials are asking them to move inside. You have a lot of unhealthy air here. The air quality is really poor. Cooler temperatures, and then that rain that we are expecting. Many of these people coming from the town of Paradise is just one of the many communities devastated by that campfire. 90% of the homes in that area destroyed. Utility crews have been working tirelessly to restore power to the town. Other small towns like Concal and Magalia here in Butte County, Northern California, destroyed to go along with that fire. Now, so far, the fire has burned down more than 151,000 acres, destroying more than 11,000 homes. It's the deadliest and most destructive wildfire in California history. The original expected containment date to get the campfire fully contained was November 30th. It appears that they're right on track with that. As for the people staying here in these makeshift tents and these communities, there are shuttle buses that do plan on taking them to a more permanent shelter to avoid that rainfall that's expected, and of course keep them inside because, again, the air quality here in this community unhealthy at the moment. Back to you.
All right, Pedro Rivera from KTXL. Thank you very much.
The story is not over. In the meantime, the White House speaking out about the cliffhanger election that was Florida.
The president made a big difference. I think that Governor Scott and Congressman DeSantis ran excellent campaigns, but this president getting in there several times in those last 6-7 days really made the difference.
So the Florida results now giving Republicans a much-needed boost after losing the House. America's A-team straight ahead on that. Coming up, Julie.
And former Navy SEAL Dan Crenshaw, newly elected to Congress, defending the president against claims he undermines democracy by attacking the news media.
I would argue that our president is consistently disruptive in those very same press conferences, and I would argue that he treats them with
how is that an attack on the
disrespect.
press, though?
Because it's literally an attack on the press.
I've literally been attacked, so let's choose our words carefully.
They clearly clearly won, and I think that people got another view of somebody like Brenda Snipes and her shenanigans, and that should be the first order of business for Governor DeSantis to really look at who's running these counties and this electoral process.
Well, Kellyanne Conway, last hour here in America's Newsroom on the Florida recount. Time for America's A-Team. Marianne Marsh, former senior advisor to John Kerry. Chris Bedford, editor-in-chief of the Daily Caller News Foundation. James Freeman from the Wall Street Journal. How you guys doing on a Monday? Everybody awake?
Good morning.
Here we go. So
Thanksgiving week.
Florida's over, or is it?
It's over for this election. We've got concessions from the Democrats and victories from the Republicans, but this was a really close one for Florida. I mean, this would have been the first Democratic governor of Florida in 20 years. The Democrats gained considerably, and I think that it's certainly not over for the state. If you're a Republican in that state, this was a shot across the bow. Same thing for Texas.
How come?
Because the Democrats are getting more and more votes, and the Republicans are struggling to win. They won this election by about 10, 11,000 votes, but that's not a lot. And over the next 4 years, 8 years, or in the 2020 election, Florida's going to be a real battleground.
He's right. I mean, the fact is Democrats are making gains in red states historically across the country in this election. But what it also highlighted is the problems we have with our voting system. It is clear we need to reform all of it, from the machines to the voter intimidation, voter registration, voter security, and the inability to tabulate and record fairly and honestly these
I don't
votes.
know, Marianne. 65 of the 67 didn't seem to have a problem with it. So you had two that are continuing offenders.
Well, first of all appointed by Jeb Bush as governor, and they've been saying, we've known since 2000, Florida has problems counting ballots. And yet now the Florida Senate says, we might actually do something about it 18 years later.
Brenda Snipes was appointed by Jeb because he had to put a Democrat in that position temporarily because the last Democrat was removed for corruption, Merriam. And then she was elected by the voters over and over again. So she's not really like a Jeb political appointee. She was
a Jeb political appointee.
Chris, I hear the point you're making about Florida, but James, I think Florida's always been razor tight.
Yeah,
about 2 years ago, the president won it by a point, I believe, in Florida. I mean, it's close.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a swing state. I mean, you could look at this and say, if you're on the small government side of things, isn't it scary how close the socialist Andrew Gillum got to becoming governor? On the other hand, this ends up, after much drama, being a win for Republicans. And one thing you take out of this, I think just like you take out of Massachusetts, is as much as a lot of folks in the media instruct Latino voters that they're supposed to hate Republicans now, they're not buying it. Running pretty strong in a number of jurisdictions.
First of all, Gillum was a Democrat and the nominee of the party and gave your guy a good run. To throw out the word socialist is pretty cheap, and I know you can do better than that. In terms of Massachusetts, I don't understand your Latino point there at all.
In terms of Charlie Baker running very well among Latino voters, and you see that in the Florida races as well, where DeSantis basically tied himself to Trump as much as anyone in the country, and won in a diverse population.
Let's just fact check here. Charlie Baker actually ran better with Democrats than the Democratic nominee because he was a lousy candidate, okay? So Charlie Baker won with 67% of the vote. Had nothing to do with any particular demographic group.
All right.
That's what he did.
Let's go to Fox. I don't think we're going to settle this today. However, Chris Wallace, Fox News Sunday, and Presidential Tone. Here's President Trump.
Tone is something that is important to me. But a lot of times you can't practice tone because you have people coming at you so hard that if you don't fight back in a somewhat vigorous way, you're not going to win. And we have to win. This country has to win.
I think that comment, Chris, sets up his attitude more so than many things I've heard in some time. He's going to battle back because he's in a town where he thinks it's necessary. And if you don't, the other side's going to hit you.
And it's especially in Washington, D.C. If you bring up any kind of support for President Trump, even at a lot of Republican gatherings, people get quiet. They kind of edge away from you. He's definitely surrounded. It's a 95% Democratic town. And President Trump is never going to be one of those politicians that like points with his thumb and does the focus-tested things that are non-threatening. He's never going to be that guy, and it works for him.
Points with his thumb. That was a good one. He does, though, take a lot of credit for the Florida wins on both Republican side. In fact, he earlier said that if it hadn't been for him sticking his head out for the Republicans, Rick Scott could have potentially lost this election. So, I mean, as close as these elections are, with the president in the office, how does the Florida recount, how does Florida affect 2020?
Well, it's huge, obviously, and it's a swing state, as we discussed. Some of these other Senate pickups, North Dakota, Indiana, Missouri, these are kind of naturally conservative electorates. I think this is a statement that the Republicans should take some comfort from. But I think as far as the tone and the toughness, which is part of why people sent Donald Trump to Washington, I think he also has an opportunity here to soften a bit. Maybe it's not in his nature, but as we think about potential either Nancy Pelosi or a similar leftist running the House, he has an opportunity to be the more reasonable adult in the room.
You were talking about what a mess Florida is. I lived there years ago. It hasn't changed, and that was a long time ago.
Right.
Okay, Palm Beach County and Broward County, they need to get their acts together.
Sure.
So now Brenda Snipes is out. Who comes in, and how critical is that position, whether it be held by a Republican or a Democrat, to the 2020 election?
Someone who can do the job. That's what matters. I have no idea, nor does anyone else, who that's going to be. But we saw throughout this election, whether it was in Florida and Georgia and Texas and a host of other places, problems with voting. And that's unacceptable. I mean, frankly, the state of Georgia should have yellow crime tape all the way around it for the way that election was run by Brian Kemp.
A lot of times you can't practice tone because you have people coming at you so hard. Hang on to that comment. You mentioned Georgia, Stacey Abrams not conceding certain language. Watch this from Sunday.
The law as it stands says that he received an adequate number of votes to become the governor of Georgia.
Is he the legitimate governor-elect of Georgia?
He is the person who won an adequate number of votes to become the governor of
hard-fought contest, but eventually you have to concede. I mean, you heard the statement from Gillum over the weekend, and she was not giving much in that interview on CNN.
Well, it's extremely common, whether it's over the Electoral College or whether it comes down to the Supreme Court or whether it goes down to winning enough votes to become the governor. If the Democrat doesn't win, they often accuse the Republican or the system of being broken. We need to fix
this is what Mariana was referring to with the crime tape around the place. What about that?
I mean, she says that votes were stolen from the Democratic Party.
She conceded the race, but no one's going to concede that was a well-run election. Brian Kemp oversaw his own election. He purged 1.5 million voters from the rolls. The lines were 4.5 hours long, and he closed 214 polling locations alone and shortened early voting. That doesn't even go into the 2016 election where his election actually got hacked and he erased all the servers. So that was not a fair and free election, and that's what we should all support here no matter what, and let the victor
Pretty heavy
the
comment.
spoils.
Not fair or free, says
It was
Marsh.
not.
This is remarkable, and this is a problem. He was freely, fairly elected under the laws of the state. It wasn't that close, 55,000 votes, and the idea that it's somehow illegitimate to want to make sure that phony votes are not cast. I don't know why this has become a sort of article of faith among Democrats to say that it's bad to ensure that we have honest elections where people who are legitimately registered voters are voting. And if it's legal, it is legitimate.
You're suggesting it wasn't legitimate now.
No, don't put words in my mouth, Hammer. I'm saying the way he played that game was not fair.
But you just said it wasn't free and wasn't fair, which means it's not legitimate.
1.5 million voters removed because of maybe a comma or a hyphen in a name. Come on.
All of this goes to the next comment here, the Congressman-elect Crenshaw, who was on CBS, and the suggestion is that American democracy is under attack. That was the allegation. The comment. Here's how it went.
And the principles that we live by have been under attack for the better part of the last 2 years.
What is he undermining exactly? What democratic freedoms have been undermined? We just had an election where we switched power in the House. Democracy is at work. People are voting in record numbers. I always ask for examples, and then we can hit those examples one by one.
I would argue that our president is consistently disruptive in those very same press conferences, and I would argue that he treats them with
how is that an attack on the press, though?
Because it's literally an attack on the press.
I've literally been attacked, so let's choose our words carefully.
This was a fascinating exchange.
Yeah. I loved it because I'm surrounded by reporters all the time in Washington, D.C., and they go out to their mimosa brunches on Sunday, and they talk about how they are heroes, and they compare themselves with reporters who actually put their lives on the line, whether it's in Mexico or Iraq or in Turkey. They are not heroes, and they're so obsessed with themselves. And watching the press coverage of CNN returning to the White House like some kind of returning conquering general was so weird, and I think that Americans are going to be very bored of the press covering the press and being martyrs on the press for another 2 years, which they're going to get.
I think if we didn't get, but I think if the press didn't get as much pushback as it does from the White House, then it wouldn't be a story, because certainly the press should not be covering itself.
Yeah, I think.
But we have become the story. I mean,
yeah, and I think part of it is the confusion that that somehow it's a violation of the First Amendment for the president to be harsh and critical toward someone in the press. It's not. As long as he's not restricting their ability to speak, to publish, to report, he's allowed, just like anyone else, to exercise his First Amendment rights and be harsh and critical in his appraisal.
The point that he's making is that we just went through a peaceful midterm election, and Democrats picked up how many seats? Is it 37 and maybe a few more? And, you know, Republicans did well on the Senate side. They picked up a few. And that guy's seen combat. And we're a long way from that in a democratic process that we watched a week and a half ago, Chris.
Absolutely. It reminds me of a conversation I had about a week ago with a guy who said that, well, in India, we get the day off from the elections when we have this. And I said, wow, that's great. That's an interesting holiday. He said, well, we have to, because our elections are very violent. People get attacked at the polls. People get attacked by rival political parties. And we haven't had that kind of election violence in this country in about 150 years. We've had it in small scales, actually maybe 50 years.
To you three, we say thank you. Enjoy your mimosa.
I don't drink.
Chris?
I leave that to these gentlemen over here.
Well, virgin mimosa for Marianne. Chris, thank you.
Thank you.
James, nice to see you.
Thanks, Bill.
All right.
A Fox News alert on the murder of that Saudi columnist. President Trump saying the U.S. report on the Khashoggi killing could be and should be out tomorrow. Now, the president has not heard the recordings allegedly made during the gruesome act, but he has been briefed on them. In fact, he has said he does not and doesn't plan on listening to them. Benjamin Hall is live in London with the latest. Hi, Ben.
Yeah, hi, Julie. For some time, we've known that the U.S. has a copy of this tape, the tape that claims to record the last few moments of Khashoggi's life. But now we're hearing directly from President Trump just on what is on that tape. And here's what he told Chris Wallace on Fox News Sunday.
We have the tape. I don't want to hear the tape. No reason for me to hear the tape.
Why don't you want to hear it, sir?
Because it's a suffering tape. It's a terrible tape. I've been fully briefed on it. There's no reason for me to hear it.
According to Turkish authorities, the tape captures those last brutal moments of Khashoggi's life and his torture. And the president went on to acknowledge that the tape was, quote, very violent, very vicious and terrible. It's been over a month since Secretary Pompeo met with King Salman and the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman looking for answers in Riyadh. Now, according to the Washington Post on Friday, the CIA has now reportedly concluded the Crown Prince did order the killing, but the White House has yet to endorse that assessment.
They haven't assessed anything yet. It's too early. It was a very premature report, but that's possible. We're going to see.
And so we're expecting this report to come out tomorrow. If indeed the CIA concludes that MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, was behind this, it's going to be a very difficult foreign policy decision for President Trump to take. Julie?
All right, Benjamin Hall, thank you.
In a moment here, tensions between the U.S. and Beijing front and center amid a critical gathering of some major nations. World leaders now urging the U.S. and China to resolve their trade war. We'll have a look at that coming up. Also, there is this today. Roll it.
Where do you rank yourself in the pantheon of great presidents? There's Lincoln and Washington. There's FDR and Reagan. Do you make the top 10?
That answer in a moment. President Trump giving himself high remarks so far. Money man Charles Payne has a grade. Coming up next. Mr. Payne, we're
everywhere
calling
except the market.
Charles Payne, host of Making Money. Charles Payne, 2 o'clock Eastern Time, Fox Business. How you doing?
Doing okay.
Wallace was asking the president how he would grade his first couple of years in office. Here's how that exchange went.
I think I'm doing a great job. We have the best economy we've ever had.
So where do you rank yourself?
I would give myself, look, I hate to do it, but I will do it. I would give myself an A+. Is that enough? Can I go higher than that?
So you could go A++.
You could. So you want my grade? Mm-hmm. I say A-. And the only reason I wouldn't go A+ is because of the spending. I was really hoping that we could get spending down. That spending bill that went through was was an unmitigated disaster. It was just way too much. Everything else, obviously, is a plus, A plus. And how could you deny the president that? From our unemployment rate, wages at 3.1%. You know, the last number that came out on jobs, the wage numbers for non-supervisory workers was 3.2%. I hadn't seen non-supervisory workers wage increase faster than their supervisors for like 3 or 4 years. So it's the kind of thing that's getting down to the heartland. It's getting down to folks who hadn't seen pay raises in a long time. On top of that, we've got millions of people who are working who have even given up on the job market, let alone ever finding a job. They stop even looking for a job because they didn't think they can get one. So A plus takes it to an A minus when you consider the spending and the debt.
So employment doing great. The economy doing great. What's up with housing then?
Housing has a lot of issues. Labor, they can't find any construction workers, and it's costing them a lot of money. They don't have enough land and lots. They don't have enough supply. And I think the biggest issue more recently, though, is our mortgage rates. They're starting to go up. This is why I've been screaming, please, Federal Reserve, wake up. Moments ago, the National Association of Home Builders just came out with their sentiment reading. It was an unmitigated disaster. Wall Street thought it was going to be unchanged. It was down like 8 points. Only a couple of times in history has it been down more than that month over month. And the main issue here, traffic. People are not looking for homes anymore. And this is the one thing this is one of the first indicators I saw after President Trump was elected. We had gone over 10 years without expansion and people looking for homes. Like the foot traffic was just always down. And now it's back under the 50 number, which is the magical number.
Wow. Off 245 on the Dow 30 as of now. We'll see where it goes in the afternoon. Vice President Pence from overseas says this: every nation gathered here at APEC has a place in POTUS's vision for a free and open Indo-Pacific. Our vision excludes no one. We only ask that nations respect their neighbors' sovereignty, embrace free, fair, and reciprocal trade, and uphold individual rights. What's going on with this deal with China?
I got to tell you something. I love what Vice President Pence is doing. As everybody out there, and this is really just, to me, inaccurate media reporting, because we want NATO to pay their fair share, because we want the United Nations to do the right thing, does not mean America is retreating from leadership on the global stage. Evidence of that. Vice President Pence goes to this meeting and he tells China, you've got to stop this debt trap financing. You are ripping off countries. You are de facto taking them over. In fact, the president of Malaysia called it colonization. And give you an example. Tonga, small country, China lent them $160 million. 1/3 of their GDP. They said, we need the money back right now. We don't have it. We want it right now. We don't have it. They're looking for the world to help. We didn't hear anything from anyone in the world. Crickets, crickets, crickets. So what do? They succumb. They sign on to China's Belt and Road program. They get a 5-year reprieve on having to pay the 160 back. In fact, China says, hey, you know what? We may lend you $4.8 billion, 10 times your GDP. They're going to own that island. They don't have to make man-made islands anymore. They will own that island. Vice President Pence is the only person in the Western world standing up to that. It's really crazy stuff. You know, think about it in this country. We call it predatory lending, but it's even much more.
Very interesting. It's a story's gone under the radar. Charles, thank you. See you at 2 o'clock.
Thanks a lot.
Good to see you. See you later.
Thank you, sir.
Hey, did you know the holiday shopping season's almost here? Well, the tips and tricks you need to know. Are you ready, Bill?
Yeah.
Be ready for Black Friday and Cyber Monday. Plus, Washington Redskins quarterback Alex Smith goes down with a serious injury. The 24/7 crew is here next. Tis the season of football and shopping. Gee, I wonder which one I'll talk about. The 24/7 crew is here. Jared Max, Brett Larson. All right, I'm going to let you take off on football.
Big day yesterday. In Washington, not great.
Horrible. As Joe Theismann told the Washington Post, November 18th is a horrible day for Redskins quarterbacks. Alex Smith, the starting quarterback for the Redskins, suffered a gruesome injury. Almost the exact same injury we saw 33 years ago to the day. 33 years to the day since Joe Theismann's career was ended by Lawrence Taylor. Alex Smith's may have been ended in part by J.J. Watt, another legend. Some of the connections here are just eerie. Joe Theismann was at yesterday's game watching this. The injuries, a broken right fibula, broken right tibia, same as Theismann as for Smith. Smith's injury happened near the 40-yard line, same as Theismann. The final score of both games, identical, 23-21. Joe Theismann got hurt in his 167th regular season game. Smith, his 166th. does he make it back for 167? We'll see if modern medicine, if there are advances. Both injuries.
Theismann was at the game yesterday.
Theismann was there. He was with his wife driving from their home in Virginia and talking about the anniversary of this play. While they get there, he said he was sick to his stomach watching it. On Twitter, he wrote how badly he feels for Alex Smith, and that watching this, he says the leg is exactly like mine. You see that
33 years ago, I feel so bad for him. J.J. Watt said this: thoughts are with you, Alex. Absolutely gutted about it. Never want to see that for anyone ever. Wishing you all the best, brother.
Wishing the best to Alex Smith on this one. We'll see where they go forward. And no, Colin Kaepernick is not going to be considered because people are already throwing this out there. Do you bring in Cap? It's not going to happen.
Sports are just too dangerous. I've never broken a finger going online, going shopping.
That
so
is
I feel
a
like
true
it's a
story. You might get a little repetitive stress injury from shopping. 'Tis the season. You probably already email inbox filling with the deals for Black Friday, Cyber Monday. They're already here. A couple things, though, that I want to quickly point out. 'Tis also the season for hackers. It's a great time because they can get you with the oh, there was a problem with your order. Oh, your shipping's going to be delayed. And you're going to not process it as we normally would because it's time of year when you're getting all of these things. So you got to be aware of some phishing scams. Also, this is a great time of year to buy a new TV. TVs are discounted. They get new ones at the beginning of the year. Retailers want to get them out of the stores, so that's a good time to get a good price. Look out for these countdown deals. Amazon's big on this. A lot of the online retailers where it's like 54 minutes to go to buy this for a certain price, or there's only 10 of them. Don't stress yourself out over stuff like that. And don't forget, free shipping doesn't get it there in time. So you might want to have it shipped to whomever you're sending
How much
the gift
do you
to.
think the online shopping will increase this year over last year?
It goes up a lot every year. I would say this year we'll probably see 20 to even up to 50% increase because it's so much easier. You don't have to deal with crowds. Some people like that. Some people like going and being in the crowds of trying to get things. I prefer a nice cup of coffee, a comfortable pair of pajamas, and a good internet connection.
Thank you.
So I'll be shopping when I'm at work.
And the more often you do it, you don't have to keep looking in your car to look at the credit card number.
Just hit refresh. Thank you, Jared. Great to see you. Brett, thanks.
Thanks, guys.
All right, in a moment here, new details on the Mueller matter. Trump standing off on the weekend over that Fox News Sunday interview. President Trump, what he's saying about that coming up next.
If Whitaker decides in any way to limit or curtail the Mueller investigation, are you okay with that?
Look, it's going to be up to him. I really believe he's going to do what's